October 29th, 1977, 2 a.m. Elvis Presley walked into the studio at Graceland for what would be his final recording session. He was 42 years old, grossly overweight, barely able to walk without assistance. His breathing was labored. His eyes were unfocused from the prescription drugs coursing through his system. Everyone in that studio knew Elvis was dying. His producer, Felton Jarvis, knew it. The sound engineers knew it. The musicians who'd played with Elvis for years knew it. But nobody said anything. Nobody had the courage to tell the king of rock and roll that he needed to stop, go to the hospital, save his own life. But what Elvis recorded that night, in those final hours in that studio, was so emotionally raw, so prophetic, so haunting, that his producer, Felton Jarvis, literally broke down crying and begged Elvis to stop recording. "You can't release this," Felton said through his tears. "People will think it's a suicide note." Elvis just smiled that sad, knowing smile and said, "Maybe that's because it is." 10 months later, Elvis would be dead, and the recordings from that night would remain locked away for years because they were too painful, too honest, too much like listening to a man say goodbye to the world. This is the story of Elvis Presley's final recording session. The songs he chose, the words he couldn't get through without crying, and the moment everyone in that studio realized they were watching a legend prepare to die. By October 1977, Elvis Presley was a shadow of the man he'd been. The prescription drug addiction that had been building for years had completely taken over his life. He was taking dozens of pills every day, uppers to wake up, downers to sleep, pain pills for his various ailments, tranquilizers for his anxiety. His weight had ballooned to nearly 260 pounds. His face was bloated and puffy. His movements were slow and labored. He'd fall asleep mid-sentence, mid-conversation, sometimes even while eating. The drugs had him in their grip, and everyone around him was too scared or too dependent on him to intervene. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, only cared about keeping the money machine running. "Get him on stage," Parker would say. "I don't care how you do it, just get him performing." Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was in denial. He couldn't accept that his son, his cash cow, his legacy, was killing himself slowly in front of everyone. And Elvis's girlfriend, Ginger Alden, was too young and overwhelmed to understand the severity of the situation. She was only 20 years old, trying to manage a 42-year-old man who was essentially committing suicide with prescription drugs. The last tour had been a disaster. Elvis had barely been able to finish shows. He'd forgotten lyrics to songs he'd sung thousands of times. He'd slurred his words. In some cities, fans had walked out, demanding refunds. The critics were savage. Elvis Presley is a parody of himself, a bloated, drugged-out shadow of the artist who once changed music forever. Elvis read every review, every cruel word, and it destroyed him. "They're right," Elvis told his friend and bodyguard, Red West, in September 1977. "I'm a joke. I'm pathetic. I should just quit. Just disappear." "Then why don't you?" Red asked. "You've got more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Walk away, get healthy, come back when you're ready." "Because I don't know who I am without this. Without the music, without performing. Without being Elvis Presley, I'm nobody. I'm just a fat, drugged-out has-been from Mississippi." But Elvis did have one thing left. One place where he could still be himself, still create, still feel like the artist he'd once been. The recording studio. RCA Records had been pressuring Elvis to record a new album. His last studio album, Moody Blue, had been released in July 1977 and had done well commercially. But RCA wanted more. They always wanted more. Felton Jarvis, Elvis's longtime producer and friend, approached him in late October. "We need to get some new recordings. RCA is breathing down my neck. Can you come into the studio? Just a few sessions, nothing major." Elvis was reluctant. He knew he wasn't in good shape. knew his voice wasn't what it used to be, but he also knew that recording was one of the few things that still brought him joy. "We'll do it at Graceland," Elvis said, "in the Jungle Room. I can't go to Nashville. Too many people, too much pressure. But here, at home, maybe I can do it." The Jungle Room was a den at Graceland that Elvis had converted into a recording studio. It was called the Jungle Room because of its excessive 1970s Polynesian decor. Fake fur on the ceiling, tiki carvings, green shag carpet. It was tacky and perfect, and totally Elvis. They set up equipment in late October. The plan was to do several sessions over a few weeks, record enough songs for a full album, maybe even 2 albums if Elvis was feeling good. But Elvis wasn't feeling good. He was feeling worse than ever. And deep down, he knew this would be his last chance to say what he needed to say. October 29th, 1977. The musicians started arriving at Graceland around 8 p.m. The core band, James Burton on guitar, Jerry Sheff on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums. The Sweet Inspirations and Kathy Westmoreland on backing vocals. All veterans who'd worked with Elvis for years. Felton Jarvis was already there, setting up microphones, checking sound levels, making sure everything was perfect. He wanted this session to go smoothly, wanted to give Elvis every chance to succeed. But when Elvis finally came downstairs around midnight, everyone's hearts sank. He looked terrible, worse than anyone had seen him. His face was pale and bloated, his eyes were glassy and unfocused. He was wearing a velour tracksuit that barely fit his expanded frame. He moved like a man twice his age, shuffling slowly, breathing heavily. "Hey, everybody," Elvis said, his voice thick and slurred. "Sorry I'm late. Had trouble waking up." Nobody said what they were all thinking, that Elvis looked like he was dying, that this was a mistake, that someone should call a doctor instead of recording an album. But they were professionals, and more than that, they loved Elvis. So they smiled and said hello and pretended everything was normal. Elvis settled into a chair in front of the microphone. He couldn't stand for long periods anymore. Sitting was the only way he could make it through a session. "What are we starting with?" Elvis asked Felton. Felton had prepared a list of songs, mostly upbeat material, fun songs that wouldn't be too taxing vocally, songs that might give Elvis some energy, some life. But Elvis shook his head when he saw the list. "No," he said quietly. "I don't want to sing any of that." "What do you want to sing, E?" Elvis was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to sing Hurt. Have we got that arrangement ready?" Felton's stomach dropped. Hurt was a ballad, a slow, emotional, devastating ballad about pain and regret and realizing you've wasted your life hurting the people you love. It was not a song for someone in Elvis's condition. "E, maybe we should start with something easier. Warm up your voice a bit." "I want to sing Hurt," Elvis repeated, and there was something in his tone that said this wasn't negotiable. The musicians looked at each other nervously. They'd heard Elvis sing Hurt in concert a few times over the past year. It was always emotional, always powerful. But in his current state, they weren't sure he could get through it. "Okay," Felton said finally. "Let's run through it once. Just a practice take." But the moment Elvis started singing, everyone in that studio knew this wasn't a practice take. This was real. This was Elvis pouring out his soul. "I'm so hurt to think that you lied to me. I'm hurt way down deep inside of me. You said our love was true and we'd never, never part. Now you want someone new, and it breaks my heart." The musicians played gently, carefully, giving Elvis space to feel what he was feeling. The backing vocalists had tears in their eyes. Even the hardened sound engineers were getting choked up. Elvis got to the bridge, and his voice became stronger, more powerful, channeling all his pain into the performance. "I'm hurt, much more than you'll ever know. Yes, darling, I'm so hurt, because I still love you so." When he finished, the studio was silent. Nobody knew what to say. What they just witnessed wasn't a recording session. It was a confession, a prayer, a goodbye. Elvis sat in his chair, breathing heavily, tears still running down his face. "Did we get it?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, E," Felton said, his own voice thick with emotion. "We got it." "Good. What's next?" Over the next several hours, Elvis recorded song after song, but not the upbeat material Felton had planned. Elvis chose only ballads, only songs about loss, regret, pain, and goodbye. He sang Danny Boy, the Irish folk song about a father saying goodbye to his son. His voice broke multiple times, and he had to stop and start over, but he insisted on finishing it. He sang Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, a Willie Nelson song about lovers separated by death, promising to meet again in heaven. When he got to the line, "We'll meet again someday, in heaven above," Elvis started sobbing so hard he couldn't continue. Felton stopped the recording. "E, maybe we should take a break. You're exhausting yourself." "I'm fine," Elvis insisted, though he clearly wasn't. "I need to do this. I need to get these songs recorded." "Why?" Felton asked gently. "Why these songs? Why now?" Elvis looked at him with those sad, knowing eyes. "Because they're the truth, Felton. Everything else I've been singing for the past few years, it's all been fake, all performance. But these songs, these are real. This is what I'm really feeling." "What are you feeling, E?" "That I'm dying, and I need to say goodbye." The room went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "You're not dying," Felton said, but his voice had no conviction. "Yes, I am. We all know it. I can feel it. Every day I wake up and I'm heavier, slower, more tired. The pills aren't working anymore. Nothing works anymore. My body has given up, and I'm ready." "Don't say that," Kathy Westmoreland said. She'd been close to Elvis for years. "You can get help. You can get clean. You can—" "It's too late," Elvis interrupted. "I'm too far gone. And honestly, I don't want to fight anymore. I'm tired, Kathy. I'm so tired." James Burton, the guitarist, spoke up. "Then why are we here? Why are you recording if you've given up?" "Because I want to leave something honest behind. All those movies I made and half the songs I recorded, they weren't me. They were what Colonel Parker wanted, what RCA wanted, what everyone wanted except me. But these songs, tonight, this is me. This is Elvis Aaron Presley, not Elvis the brand. And I want people to hear it, even if they can't hear it until after I'm gone." Felton realized what was happening. Elvis wasn't recording an album. He was recording his last testament, his suicide note in song form. "E, I can't release these. People will think—" "I don't care what people think," Elvis said, his voice rising. "For once in my life, I don't care about the image, the brand, the money. I just want to tell the truth." There was a long silence. Then Felton nodded. "Okay, what else do you want to record?" Elvis pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. He'd made a list. Songs he wanted to sing. Songs that meant something to him. "Unchained Melody," Elvis said. "I want to do Unchained Melody." Everyone in the room knew that song. Elvis had performed it in his final concert in Indianapolis just 4 months earlier. It had been heartbreaking then, with Elvis barely able to get through it. In his current condition, it would be nearly impossible. "Are you sure?" Felton asked. "I'm sure." They set up for the song. This time, Elvis stood. He needed to stand for this one, needed to give it everything he had left. The piano started, that simple, beautiful introduction, and Elvis began to sing. "Oh, my love, my darling, I've hungered for your touch." His voice was weak at first, shaky, uncertain, but as the song progressed, something happened. Elvis found his power, found his voice, found the artist he'd been before the drugs, before the weight, before everything fell apart. "Are you still mine? I need your love. I need your love. God speed your love to me." He was belting now, his voice soaring despite his physical condition. The musicians were playing with everything they had, supporting Elvis, lifting him up. When he hit the final note, holding it impossibly long, everyone in the studio was crying, not just tearing up, full-on sobbing, because they just witnessed something sacred. A dying man singing about longing for love, for connection, for peace. Elvis collapsed back into his chair, completely spent. He sat there for several minutes, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. "That's it," Felton said, his voice breaking. "We're done. Elvis, you need to rest. You need to see a doctor." "One more," Elvis whispered. "I need to do one more." You can barely sit up. You've given everything. We can come back tomorrow." There might not be a tomorrow, and the finality in his voice silenced everyone. "One more song, please." Felton couldn't refuse him. "What song?" Elvis looked up, and there was something in his expression that was both heartbreaking and peaceful. "I want to sing a gospel song. Just me and the piano. No band, no background vocals. Just me talking to God."
It was now almost 6 a.m. The sun was starting to rise over Graceland. Most of the musicians had been there for 10 hours. They were exhausted, emotionally drained, but nobody wanted to leave. Elvis had the band take a break. He sat at the piano himself, something he rarely did in recording sessions anymore. His fingers found the keys, playing a simple chord progression he'd known since childhood. "What are you going to sing?" Felton asked softly. "Something my mama used to sing to me," Elvis said. "A hymn. I don't even know if it has a proper title. We just called it 'Take My Hand, Precious Lord.' It was a gospel standard, a song about asking God for guidance when you're lost and tired and ready to go home. A song about surrender." "Are you ready?" Felton asked. Elvis nodded, and then he began to play and sing. His voice was quiet, almost whispered, but it carried more emotion than all the powerful belting he'd done earlier. This wasn't performance, this was prayer. As Elvis sang, his voice would crack and break, and he'd pause to compose himself before continuing. He sang about being lost in the darkness, about storms and struggles, about wanting to go home. "Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home." The engineers had the tape rolling, but they weren't really thinking about the recording anymore. They were witnessing something private, something sacred, a man having a conversation with God in front of them. When Elvis reached the final verse, his playing became simpler, his voice even softer. He was singing about seeing the light, about crossing over, about finally being at peace. And then, in the middle of the final line, Elvis stopped playing. His hands dropped from the piano keys, his head bowed. Felton waited, thinking maybe Elvis needed a moment, but then he heard it. Elvis was crying. Not the emotional tears from earlier, deep, body-shaking sobs. Kathy Westmoreland was the first to move. She walked over to Elvis and put her hand on his shoulder. "Elvis, are you okay?" "I can't do it," Elvis said through his tears. "I can't get through it. I can't finish." "That's okay. We have what we need." "No," Elvis said, looking up at her with devastated eyes. "You don't understand. I can't finish because I don't want to. That last line, about going home, about being at peace, if I sing it, if I finish that song, it's over. It's really over." The room went completely silent. Everyone understood what Elvis was saying. As long as he didn't finish that final line, as long as that song remained incomplete, he could pretend he wasn't ready, wasn't done, wasn't saying goodbye forever. But Elvis took a deep breath, put his hands back on the piano keys, and said quietly, "But I have to finish it. I have to." And he sang that final line, sang about going home to rest, sang about being with the Lord. When he finished, Elvis sat at the piano for a long moment. Then he stood up, slowly, painfully, and looked at everyone in the studio. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for being here, for letting me do this, for letting me be honest." Felton said, "Please, go to the hospital. Get help. You don't have to die." Elvis smiled that sad smile again. "Yes, I do. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And I'm okay with that. I've been ready for a long time, since Mama died, really. I've just been existing, going through the motions. But now I've said what I needed to say, and I can rest." James Burton stepped forward. "What do you want us to do with these recordings?" "Keep them safe," Elvis said. "Maybe someday, when people are ready to hear them, you can release them. Or maybe keep them locked away forever. I don't care. I just needed to sing them, needed to get them out of my soul." Elvis left the studio around 7 a.m. that morning. He went upstairs to his bedroom, took his pills, and slept for 18 hours straight.
That recording session, on October 29, 1977, was indeed Elvis Presley's last. He never went back into the studio, never recorded another song. In the months that followed, Elvis's health continued to deteriorate. He was barely performing, barely functioning. His final concert was on June 26, 1977, in Indianapolis, just 4 months before that last recording session. On August 16, 1977, less than 10 months after that final session, Elvis Presley was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. He was 42 years old. The official cause was heart attack brought on by prescription drug abuse. But those who were in the studio that October night knew the truth. Elvis had died months earlier, spiritually and emotionally. His body just took a while to catch up. The recordings from that session remained locked away for years. RCA didn't know what to do with them. They were too raw, too painful, too honest. Releasing them felt wrong, like exploiting a man's final moments. Felton Jarvis, who had been so close to Elvis, couldn't listen to the tapes for months after Elvis's death. When he finally did, he broke down completely. "It's like listening to a ghost," Felton told a friend. Elvis knew he was dying. He knew he was his last chance to say goodbye, and he used those songs to tell us everything he couldn't say in regular conversation. Parts of that session were eventually released years later, scattered across various albums and compilations. The performance of Unchained Melody from that night was never officially released, but bootleg recordings circulated among fans who recognized it as something special. The gospel song, the one Elvis couldn't finish at first, was deemed too personal to release. It remained in the vault, a private moment between Elvis and God that the world wasn't meant to hear. But those who were there that night never forgot it. They spoke about it in interviews, in books, in documentaries. They described the atmosphere, the emotion, the sense that they were witnessing something sacred. Elvis knew he was dying, Taffy Westmoreland said in a 1985 interview. That night in the studio wasn't about making another album. It was about confession, about absolution, about making peace with the end. James Burton said in his memoir, "I played with Elvis for years, thousands of performances, hundreds of recording sessions. But that last night, that was different. That was Elvis stripping away every bit of the persona and just being a man. A scared, tired man who was ready to go home." The tragedy of that final recording session isn't just that it was Elvis's last. It's that it revealed what had been true for years. Elvis Presley, the man, had been drowning while Elvis Presley, the brand, kept performing. Everyone around him, Colonel Parker, RCA Records, even his own family, had been so focused on keeping the machine running that nobody stopped to save the man operating it. And Elvis, trapped in his fame, his addiction, his grief over losing his mother 19 years earlier, couldn't save himself. That recording session was his way of saying all the things he'd never been able to say while alive. That he was tired, that he was hurt, that he was ready to rest. That despite everything, the fame, the money, the adoration of millions, he'd never really been happy since his mother died. The songs he chose that night told a story of a man who'd loved and lost, who'd achieved everything and felt empty, who had spent his whole adult life looking for the peace he'd felt as a child in his mother's arms. And, in the end, the only place Elvis could find that peace was in death. 10 months after that recording session, Elvis got his wish. He went home. He rested. And everyone who was in that studio on October 29, 1977, knew that on some level, Elvis had already said goodbye that night. The final recording session wasn't really about making music. It was about a dying man finding the courage to face the end with honesty, to stop pretending, to stop performing, to just be Elvis Aaron Presley, tired and ready to go home. And in those recordings, preserved forever, is the truth about Elvis that the world rarely got to see. Not the hip-swiveling rock and roll rebel, not the movie star or the Vegas showman, just a man. A broken, lonely, exhausted man who used the only language he really understood, music, to say goodbye. If this story of Elvis's final recordings moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to understand that behind every legend is a human being struggling with very human pain. Have you ever witnessed someone's final creative work? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more untold stories about the real people behind the music that changed the world.